projects, I mean, one of the things that I'm trying to do is to kind of use materials that may already have some kind of existing identity, and to see how it might be interesting to kind of destabilize that identity in some way, or to use it, like channel it in a different direction. So oftentimes things that have kind of some sort of pre-existing institutional identity, I use sometimes evidence or things that could potentially be evidence in a criminal trial, or broadcasts from media, or books that are commercially published, a wide range of things really that kind of allows me to have a way into what our relationships are with institutions. So in terms of like physical form, it often comes out as video or performance or installation, all of those kinds of things. I think it kind of the idea comes first, and then the physical form comes after. But it often involves this kind of overlap between real life and art, or art and non-art, I suppose, as a way to kind of blur that boundary. I mean, it was sort of this joint project that Waalko and I came up with as we were sort of thinking about areas where our own art practices overlapped. And for me, I've always been interested by the way that art objects exist in an environment of some kind, and the way that the space might define how we look at a thing, if we just describe it as art or not. And also sometimes how art can exist outside the walls of a sort of frame, if you will, like a gallery space or something like that, that makes it very sort of clear that it's supposed to be viewed as art. So there are all these ways that the way that we look at something can change its nature without changing its physical form. It can move from not art to art due to so many different ways of looking at it or placing it and that kind of thing. And for me, that's a really important starting point for what objects and events can become and what their potential is. So the observer effect is kind of a way, it's like a way in to that issue, because whether or not, sort of the effect in science of looking at something and measuring it and then actually changing the thing that you measure, I think is a really good analogy for the way that we can also change the things that we look at in the art world. And it's also true in a social sense today. It's kind of what's happening a lot with gathering data on ourselves by governments or corporations who would like to either direct our behavior in some way, or would like to learn more in order to better sell things to us. That is a kind of phenomenon that I think is really important now. It's becoming more important, and it also defines the way that we look at the world. If you don't know a lot about a particular type of a whole range of music, for example, but you have some things that you really like and you buy some music online, then it'll propose all of these other things that are kind of like it in an effort to get you to buy that as well. And it seems to kind of limit what you have access to. So all of the worlds that we see are all different, because if I like different music than you, then I'm going to see all these other things that are proposed for me that you're not going to see, and vice versa. And so we were also trying to deal with that thing, that phenomenon that's happening in terms of the way that we can all see the world differently just because of this data gathering. That's also part of it. It depends. It depends on the work, because I think that my interests are fairly broad in terms of what they refer to, and it could be that I would read something interesting and want to kind of make work about it, and then maybe that changes 6 months later. But I think I was really happy to hear in Naomi's work actually that there was a reference to Irving Goffman, because I think that there's a lot of potential there that also comes out in some of my work, and particularly this work as well, about what qualifies as a performance, and potentially anything can, just due to the fact that we change the way that we are in different social contexts, and so it does allow for, and that also fits in with the sort of observer effect, the fact that we are being observed by other people in different contexts changes the way that we are as people. So I am looking for ways to consider sort of real life events that may have some kind of institutional meaning also as performances. And so this type of work that you have here, which shows at least in the middle part of it, it shows an interview on CNN with me being the sort of interviewee, described as an expert in terrorism and that sort of thing. I did want to look at the potential for that to be somewhere between sort of real news and fictional performance, and I think that this mode of presentation is a way to sort of access that. So that's just one example of the kind of a type of sociology that I think is really interesting for defining how we behave. For me, a lot of it is about the question of value, and the way that value is always shifting based on kinds of shifting desires and scarcity and limitations and things like that, which is an intrinsic part of the art world as well, in terms of what has value and why. And it's very difficult to define, and it depends on so many different opinions, really, by different people. And I wanted to kind of create a link between that and the sorts of kinds of scarcity value that get created by sort of membership schemes and kind of VIP treatment, and all of a sudden, like, this sort of space that is kind of roped off suddenly becomes high value just by virtue of the fact that only some people get to go in there. And so I wanted to just like create this little bubble of high value by restricting access to it to certain people. And I think that it's fun to play with that as well, because even in the art world, especially in London or the UK, it's often described as a private view, the very first sort of vernissage, kind of opening reception. And it's never really private, it's only private in the sense that you go if you are invited or you know about it, but it's not like if you show up they're going to be like, no, you can't come in many cases at least. So I wanted to kind of push that a bit further and say, actually there could be like this kind of red carpet treatment for a piece of video art, and kind of limit access in that sense, and see what happens when it's private. It's also a way of kind of experiencing work differently too, because only the people who went in there at that time were able to see what was going on in there. And so for other people to experience the work, they had to ask them sort of, what did you see? And so it creates a different way of watching a video. You have to hear it from someone else, what it was that they saw. And the third way that it was kind of dealing, for me, was also kind of dealing with performance. And so that's why there's a CCTV camera that is showing the inside as people sit down and watch the video. That allows the kind of the experience of being a VIP in some way or another to be kind of performed, so that people can, if you don't get to see the video that's at the heart of what's in there, you at least get to see the performance of specialness in some way, or this performance of exclusivity. And you have even a little walkway where you can sort of stand behind the barrier and watch people going in and out. So I wanted to kind of allow people to become the performers, the people with special gold and pink wristbands.
There's so much to see, even though we are here every day. I haven't experienced all of them. It's just pretty incredible what is in this building alone. I'd love to hear the comments from the people as they walk through and just kind of see the different interpretations, because that was the idea this year, really, especially get the conversation started. In all, the grant has 19 art prize pieces here. You've seen the lines we've shown outside. This place is really a draw each and every year. And Dana said the exposure of art prize has helped increase their membership too. And museum members do get perks that others just simply don't. You can visit the museum during hours that aren't open to the public. Member hours, 10 a.m.
For me, it's important. If there's a way that can be kind of exploited, I really try to, or at least I try to allow that to happen. I don't think it needs to be forced, but I think that it's actually quite natural for humor to come out in a kind of gallery context, because there's so much kind of absurdity that can be just with a few gestures can be, I think, brought out and highlighted in some way. But I think that's kind of, there's a fundamental arbitrariness that exists in everyday life in terms of the categories that we put things in, and it's just how things are, and if you don't question it, then it just everything seems maybe kind of normal. But if you sort of ask why things are the way they are, oftentimes there's not a very good answer. It's just kind of, that's how things have ended up. And so I do think that if you can just reveal a bit of that arbitrariness, all of a sudden it is possible for the world to seem quite absurd and, according to these different categories. In that, I mean, I was always struck by the way that when you have television news channels, or if you go online and you're reading a newspaper online, you can be reading something, really kind of terrible events that you're just, sort of are being described to you that maybe happened yesterday, and at the same time there's a little block on the screen that is selling you, trying to sell you a vacation or a handbag or something, and it just seems, that kind of juxtaposition for me is super weird, and I find it weird that those kinds of terrible events can be harnessed by a website or a television news program to sell advertising and that kind of thing. It's just, but that's the way things are. And so part of it, I think, is, trying to bring out those juxtapositions that might otherwise just kind of slip underneath the surface and not really be noticed. Same with these tension barriers. I mean, they're the sorts of things that you can use them here in a kind of jokey way, but yet at the same time they also are the sorts of things you have to stand in line when you're waiting to enter a country, or you're having these interactions with institutions that are kind of important, where your rights are at stake in some way. And so these little devices have this kind of, they have kind of no identity until they're placed in space, and then they can take on all these different forms, ranging from super serious to super not serious. And I think that is also a nice thing to be able to explore, is how the identity of the material can change so easily.